So now let's shift a little bit. Let's pivot to another part of the exam. We're going to look at a component now, the document-based question. If there's anything that you're all writing it, whether you're in person, at home, or digital at school, you're all writing this. And the rubric, I've always said students can hit a target they can see. What is the rubric asking you to do? In general, all the rubric is, it's the scoring guide or scale that's going to be used to score your work. It's scored on a 7-point scale. All document-based questions are, 7 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, and each point is earned all by itself on its own. That'll be important here a bit later on. Stay tuned in our next episode. Dr. Webb will break down the long essay rubrics, which are different but similar in some ways in tomorrow's episode of AP Daily Live Review. So here are your directions laid out in that classic Times New Roman font that is what it all looks like that the College Board publishes everything in. Notice how there's 7 points and they're tucked into these 6 bullets. I'll show you which one has 2 tucked into it. So if you're ever short, if you're ever sort of in a spot where you don't remember what it is you're supposed to do, go back to your directions because they're sort of implicitly laid in here. My own class, my own students, we never read the directions on the test because by this point in time, we've been through this and over this ground so much that my students know what's on the exam. If my kids get the test and like, gosh, well, I didn't know I needed a thesis. Well, then I guess I've kind of sort of done something wrong. And so therefore, we'll talk about what each of these means, the bold-faced, or the red print rather, heading further down on a point-by-point basis. So you know what it is you're actually trying to do with all this content that you're trying to put together and your topics. First of all, a little philosophy from the reading. I've been a reader now for over 20 years. I've trained readers with the reading. I helped set the standards in varying years for how the sample questions get built and the scoring guides themselves. So I've read a good 35,000 essays in that time. So I can tell you a lot about student work and what I've seen and haven't seen that's important for you to know about what you're up against. At the reading, as policy, we train our readers that when we look at your paper, when your paper is right in front of us, all right, we are told before we even read a word to consider it to be a first draft written in a pressure situation under a time constraint. And so going along with that, you will notice the rubric I gave you. The rubric I gave you says that there's nothing about it that's written in the negative. There's nothing in there about mistakes, about a student making small mistakes or big mistakes, or how do you figure mistakes in. The rubric is only built in the affirmative. We should reward you for what you know more than punish you for what you don't know. It's up to you to give us something that you know. So our first point, thesis. This is the College Board's wording for it. Respond to the prompt is a historically defensible thesis that establishes a line of reasoning. What's that mean in real English? For my own students, I've always explained in real English, your thesis for my class always will be your position on or your response to the question being asked. That's what you need to do to come up with a thesis to earn that point. It's got to be something provable and supportable. It's not just simply restating the question. For instance, if you ask me, Mr. Pulaski, do you like coffee? And my reply to you is, do I like coffee? Well, I have not done a darn thing to answer the question at all, right? So you simply have to have a position on the question, not parrot it back to me, all right? It can be one or more sentences located in one or more places, either the introduction or the conclusion. And this is because you're writing a first draft in a pressure situation. Tell me if this sounds like anybody you know. Kid comes into my room all the time. I give them the question, they look at it, they're deer in the headlights, what do they do? And they hear my voice in their head saying, well, if you don't know what to do, you just got to start writing. And so they start writing and they're thrashing around, and then suddenly they get a toehold on an idea, and that toehold turns into a foothold, and that foothold makes that paper generate real traction, so that by the time they get over here to the end, they can look back and they can tell you where they've been better than over here at the beginning. They could tell you where they were going to go. Sound like anybody you know? That's 7/10 of the kids I have on any given day. And because of that, the rubric allows for you to have your conclusion, your thesis at the end or at the beginning, because it's a first draft. So it's important for you to be self-aware. By this point, you should have a sense of, if you know up front that you had a real tight setup, you've got a real tight thesis, a strong argument, and you're just going on to make it, you just go ahead and write body paragraphs until your arm falls off. You just keep laying out that case, making the case. On the other hand, if you are self-aware enough to know that you kind of were unsure of what your position was going to be, where you're going to go, how you're going to take things, you'd better make sure before you end that paper, that DBQ response, you lock it up, come back and tie things together in a nice tight conclusion that lays out your argument. Otherwise, you run the risk of missing the thesis point. But either one is fine, front or back, fielder's choice. Contextualization. Describe a broader historical context relative to the prompt. Well, what's that mean again in real English? Your response's context must relate to the topic of the question, the broader historical events, developments, and processes that occur before, during, or after the time frame of the question. Okay, well, again, what does that mean? In my own class, we call that backstory. It's sort of it's the background out of which this question sprung. All right, it's your how we got to here. This question is asking us about whatever American involvement in Vietnam. Well, how did we get to here? Questions asking about the Great Depression and our attempts to recover from it. Well, how did we get to here? Question asking about the 7 Years' War. How did we get to here? All right, and it's got to be more involved than a mere phrase or reference, as you'll see. Here we've got a couple points tucked into the one bullet. This is the one bullet where two are couched inside. For at least 3 documents, address the topic of the prompt, supporting your argument in response to the prompt using it, and supporting your argument using at least 6 documents. Well, how's that work? There's 2 different things that are tucked into this bullet point. One is if you use 3 documents to address the prompt, you get a point. If you use 6 documents to actually support your argument on the prompt, you get 2 points. You get more love that way. And so to explain what that means, here's the big difference. 1 point. If you can describe 3 of the documents about the question, this is the classic document 2 says. And it's not just quoting. Quoting is letting the document speak for you. That's not so great. But document 2 says, and you want to tell me document 2 says, you do that 3 times, relating the question, you're going to earn a point. On the other hand, if for 6 documents, you can use the content. Notice the difference. What does the document show, prove, illustrate, demonstrate about your thesis? And what's your thesis? Your position on the question. You're advancing an argument then. This gets you more love. It gets you your 2 points. Beyond that, evidence beyond the documents, you've got to bring something of your own to the party. At least one additional proper noun, specific piece of historical evidence relevant to the argument. These are the classic names, the stuff that you think you're studying in history class to do for this course. And it must be described and elaborated upon. Simply dropping the name in Committees of Correspondence or the Stamp Act and walking away does not earn you the point. Additionally, the evidence that you use to kind of get us to our how we got to here, it's got to be different than that evidence. This is called the no 2-for-1 rule or no double dipping. Once a piece of evidence, a proper noun, is used somewhere to earn a point, it is off the table to be used to earn any other point, which is why it's a big fat lie to say, well, gosh, I just need 1 piece of evidence and I'm good. Well, 1 piece of evidence gets you 1 evidence point if it's well used. Doesn't get you anything else you might need. Context for a document, contextualization in general, and you'll see why that's important here as we go down the line. Sourcing. Hip or happy, depending what part of the country you hail from or who endorsed some things for you. For at least 3 documents, explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, or audience is relevant to the prompt. HIP it puts that together for you. Happy does as well, but it's really the why of happy. Any one of these will do. You do not need to do purpose, audience, situation, point of view for every document. That would give you 7 documents, 4 things. That's what, 28 different things to do. That's a lot. You don't need to do that. 1 is ample. And so identifying or stating what it is, the audience of document 3 does not earn you this point. What you have to do is explain what that has to do with the question being asked, which is why happy, I'm the guy that kind of created happy in our classes a couple of years back. The why is where the real action is. And the H, the A, the P, and the P are you kind of doing the math in your head. The why is the product. Why is this document there? How does it lend itself to the argument you're trying to make, the case you're trying to make about this question being asked? And then the complexity point, the 7th and final point, evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument. Can you demonstrate a complex understanding of what developments were at the center of what this question is asking? And this is the one point that can be a little bit overarching in nature. Is the overall totality of the work sophisticated? Is it involved with argument and evidence? Is there a lot of nuance to what's being said here? And there's, or argued rather, about 3 ways to go about it. Corroboration is when you can interlock multiple pieces of evidence to reinforce and further justify whatever claim or thesis position you have. Qualification, when you hedge. The American Revolution was a transformational event, but there were still slaves. There were still less rights for women. I'm making an example off the top of my head, but you sort of get the point there. You're hedging your argument versus saying it's all one thing or all the other when you answer a question. That denotes sophistication if you can do that. And then, of course, modifying your argument to consider incorporate alternative views or evidence into the main argument of your essay other than the mainstream historical analysis. So let's try to practice. How do you apply the skill in the real world on the test? because you're not doing happy and breaking down. That's your classroom activity. You're not doing that on the test. How do you, as the all-suffering student, pay the freight, deliver the goods, make this happen on the national exam, which you're all going to have to do? And you kids sitting for pencil and paper, you have to do this twice. You got to do it for your LEQ as well, as Dr. Webb will get into tomorrow. Well, skills development. Remember what thesis is: position on or response to the question being asked, contextualization, backstory, the background of which your question came. According to the rubrics, essays can be anywhere. We talked about that. But that being said, it really makes sense and it's really helpful in a lot of ways to have your contextualization and your thesis. They naturally almost dovetail on each other right in that first paragraph. And if you can play this out, you can give yourself a real dynamite setup for an argument that then you can actually build and know where you're going to want to try to go. So a 2-for-1 exercise where you could knock out thesis, knock out contextualization is an activity. If you watched AP Daily, I threw this out there for people as well, the 411. You're too young to remember telephones that were bolted to the wall, but the 411 is actually in the previous world, a previous life that your teachers would know. It's the number for information or directory assistance. So it's super convenient for us oldsters to remember that. Doesn't do you much good, but it's 411 for a different reason. Start with 4 background sentences, which sort of the how we got to here. Once you've read your question, consider the background, 4 background sentences which set that stage. You know, have information in there, kind of lengthen things out. 1 sentence that clearly states what your position on the question is, and then 1 sentence that indicates how your essay is going to be set up, your roadmap, your sort of plan of attack. Signposting is what some teachers call this. And so let's craft one of these for the following 411 model for this question. It's a real AP question, it's a DBQ question from a couple years back. Evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783. All right. First of all, evaluate is a verb. What's it mean? It means judge, weigh, determine, and the extent of change makes us a how much question. So judge, weigh, determine how much change there are in these ideas. You have to come up with a position on that. So the thing you want to avoid, this is death at the box office. You don't want to do this. This is a trap. You don't want to say that there were changes that were political, social, and economic in nature. This does not, I can tell you as being a reader, policy at the reading, this does not earn you a thesis point. And tens of thousands of kids every year are taught to do this because you've been taught to do this since 4th, 5th grade in many courses. Come up with this in the old SOAPS model or Persia model. This does not earn you a point. For the reasons you see here, everything, this thesis falls into the trap of being too universal or transferable. Everything has political, social, economic impact. And so therefore, we're looking for a thesis, a position on the question more closely tied to the question. So run away from this. You don't want to do these are your 3 pillars. You might still be able to build your argument around it, but you're not going to earn the thesis point. And another thing to think about before you start here, you still have to start with your thesis. Before you can have a backstory, you have to have something to backstory. It's a reason why any author who writes a book of nonfiction, the last thing they write is the introduction. Because they've written the book first, they have to something to introduce. But where's the introduction appear? It appears before everything else. So in reality, your mathematical order of operations is you'll go 1, 1, 4. I got to have my argument in my plan of attack, or I've got to at least have my argument. And then I can have backstory for that. So you think of it is one thesis comes first. Thesis is always the star of the show. Thesis is always center stage. This is all about argument. And then you support that argument background it. So remember our question. What was our question again? Evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence. Here's an example then of a 411. We can start with your thesis. Let's sneak down to number 1. The ideas about American independence changed and evolved a great deal from 1763 to 1783, transforming loyal subjects into American citizens. That's his argument, okay? Then the plan of attack, the body paragraphs, the subsets of the argument will be the driving factors for bringing about this change were Enlightenment ideals, social pressures, and frustration with British laws. That's sort of signpost, bam, body paragraph 1, Enlightenment ideas. Bam, body paragraph number 2, social pressures. Bam, paragraph number 3, frustration with laws. So that's all what had to get thought about or fleshed out, at least the argument. But up above it, what comes then? What's the background? What got us to these ideas about American independence? Colonists did not always define themselves as Americans. There was a time when they were simply British subjects. From the beginning, the British sent various groups with different motivations for migrating to the New World to set up colonies. After the expensive 7 Years' War, outside information, proper noun, there was an increasing pace of conflict and confrontation between the colonists and the British as the empire entered the policy of, bam, salutary neglect oppressing the colonists with various acts such as the Stamp Act, Intolerable Acts, and Sugar Act. Their efforts to get the colonists to help pay some of these costs of empire caused turmoil and hostile relations, ultimately leading to the American Revolution. So there we are. There it is. We've gotten to there. And then our thesis is the there. But notice those 5 proper nouns. That's important here because these specific evidence, notice how different this is than well, there's political, social, and economic reasons for the revolution. All right. You've got ammunition now, proper noun, showing that you know your history and know where it applies and know how to use it to advance an argument on a topic and a key concept. There's a clear position on the question, earning the point. And it's right here, you may even have, with that evidence, since some of that evidence could maybe be used for context and a standalone piece for outside information, you might even earn 3 points here, but you're definitely getting 2. Having read student work for 20 years, I can tell you most students struggle mightily to get to 3. Half the country struggles mightily to get to 3 points. You play your cards right and do this, you can earn 3 points maybe right out of the gate. And you've got the whole rest of your essay to actually collect those other points for the documents, for doing happy, for bringing in a piece of outside information or evidence, for using 3 of the documents to talk about or 6 of the documents to advance your argument. You are on your way to do that which you want to do. You've also set yourself up with a nice structure. It's instant essay, just add complete sentences. With that part there, like instant rice, just add water.